Buenos dias a todas, or good morning everyone, and welcome to Safari Mack. I'm your guide and your host, helping you make connections to the wild. If you are just joining me from last week, I hope we all had some fun swimming with the dolphins, but it's time to say goodbye to them because we are now at the halfway point in our transatlantic crossing. So we say goodbye to our flippered friends and we meet our next marine animal. But more specifically, this is our first marine bird. No, this isn't one that flies, but instead, one that swims. Ladies and gentlemen, meet the Magellanic penguin. And if we're all just set and ready to go, let's get started. First of all, let's go over their family and their history. But more specifically, let's start with the history first. You see, millions of years ago, dinosaurs ruled the earth, but they were not alone. Believe it or not, birds were also around at the same time, but they were much different than those that we see today. Now, you see, birds are considered to be the direct descendants of dinosaurs, but something happened 65 million years ago. As we know, the KT event, or the extinction of the dinosaurs, occurred. But now, birds as a whole actually survived, because while the dinosaurs became extinct, the birds could either hide in burrows or they could dive underwater, especially those of waterfowl. But they weren't the only survivors. Believe it or not, for the KT event, sharks, rays, even sea turtles survived the great extinction. And thanks to that, they still continue to patrol our oceans today. But right around somewhere around New Zealand, was an ancient penguin ancestor that was, back then, let's just say that they were really, really big. And I mean big. But from New Zealand, they have managed to eventually spread out and conquer their part in the ocean food chain. Now today we recognize these different kinds of penguins, which includes the yellow-eyed, little fairy, macaroni, Fjordland, rockhoppers, Magellanic, our species, a Galapagos penguin, a Humboldt penguin, African, and of course the more famous, largest of them all, the emperor penguin. But believe it or not, their closest relatives today are birds that actually fly. This includes albatross, petrels, and other sort of flying and diving birds. Now, let's talk about their ocean and coastal life. Now, we often associate all penguins living at the South Pole. That's kind of true, except that the problem is penguins are not always found in Antarctica. Instead, they are found in what you call the Southern Hemisphere. So what does that mean? It means right here, from a majority of South America, at least 3/4, half of Africa, and just about all of Australia, as well as New Zealand. This is the Southern Hemisphere. From there, different species occupy different parts of the world. So, for today though, we're just focusing on South America's penguins. Now, there are a couple of other penguins, but usually you can find them along the coasts of Argentina, and there's even a tiny little area called the Falkland Islands, where let's just say it's kind of the last place on Earth that you want to be left at. Because if you were to go by Antarctica style with extreme cold and fierce winds, now it's not covered in snow and ice, but it is really harsh. It is a really harsh place. Only occupied because of one reason. Penguins, albatross, and all other animals that occupy there, they cannot give birth at sea. They have to come on land to begin the next generation. Now here you can see this is the Strait of Magellan where these birds eventually got their names, but we'll get to that later in part 2 with the wild things. Now here the Magellanic penguins occupy most of the part of the Argentinian and the very southern part of Chile coast. So here they come ashore and they find their pair, which is a male and a female. Every year they come together. They are usually a monogamous, only one breeding with one other partner for life. Although that's not necessarily true. Maybe you have Fred meet Wilma, but the next breeding season, Wilma could be with a different male. Or she could go back to Fred if she wanted to, but really, each breeding season, all bets are completely off. Either way, at some point, they breed, and during which is, while we call right now our time in summer, down in the southern hemisphere, it's considered to be winter. And what is considered to be winter for us in the northern hemisphere, it's summertime in the southern hemisphere. So usually breeding takes place around from March to May, where these two will breed, and they'll usually lay around 1 to 2 eggs, and then each of them the mom and dad takes turns going back and forth to the seed to feed until finally the eggs hatch. Then usually mom would take her turn to go feed, and then the next next couple of days or so, dad goes out to feed and take over and such for the first 30 days. But because they are birds, as they get older, as you can guess, they grow pretty quickly, and as a result, the feedings become more and more erratic or a little chaotic. Usually, both have to be fed, and then finally, by the time they're at least 120 days old, or around 4 months, they're ready to leave their parents and go off completely on their own. And they won't breed until females are at least 4 and males are considered to be at least 5. So it's at least a few years before they're even ready to start their own chapter of parenthood. Speaking of parenthood, though, as I said, since they grow a lot, let's see what they eat. One of their biggest primary choices? Anchovies. Yep. Anchovies, smelt, and other smaller creatures like these guys. Now this little red ball may look a little creepy, but believe it or not, these are tiny shrimp-like animals that are called krill. Simply put, krill. Here's a more up close look at what they look like. Like I said, tiny shrimp-like animals, no bigger than even your own, not even big enough to fit in your finger. Now how do they get their food? They usually, when dad or mom, or if they're not even breeding, when they're going to feed, they're working together to find food. They swim around the swarm and they catch whatever they can to fit in their mouths and then swallow quickly. But there's a little special adaptation for how they catch their prey. This is called counter shading. Now, if you were in the water, if you were looking up, if you saw the wings, but only saw the wings, you would think that for predators, they think it's the light of the sun, while down below, if you were looking down below, you would see only the dark side of their back, which is easily helps them to confuse predators or to confuse their prey as they catch food for themselves. Now, in terms of human culture, penguins have played a pretty significant role, from the evil Mr. Penguin of the Batman comic book, even being played by the legendary actor Danny DeVito, to the comical and family fun penguins of the Madagascar franchise. There's even been a movie called Happy Feet that tells the story about an emperor named Mumble who saves his entire colony from starvation because of humans overfishing in Antarctic waters. But there's a lot more to that than just movies and comic books. Believe it or not, in New Zealand, they actually have a myth, the Maori legend, with a god called Tawaki, who walked the earth in human form but really wasn't recognized until he himself was turned into a penguin with the lightning-like eyebrows on its head. Currently, the San Francisco Zoo actually maintains the largest and most successful naturally breeding colony in human care since 1985. I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have time for today. So until next week with part 2, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button, check out my Facebook page, reach out to me if you have questions, and comment down below what you love about penguins the most. I want to hear from all of you. But until next week, this is Safari Mack. I'll see you all out there in the ocean.